I'm reading out of the book of Esther this morning. Esther is an unusual book in the Bible in that in the book of Esther, the name God or God is not referenced one time. And what's crazy about it is you can read the whole 10 chapters, which doesn't take very long, and you don't even realize it because God is implied but never mentioned. But the point that I want to look at today is a lot of times we as Christians, after we have accepted Christ, we feel like that there should be a purpose in our life that God has for us, maybe a special calling. And I want us to look at that aspect today from the book of Esther. I'm going to start in the 4th chapter, but I'm going to give you a little bit of heads up on what's taken place in the beginning. King Ahasuerus, and I'm probably mispronouncing that totally, but anyway, he was the king of Media and Persia. He had overtaken Babylon, who had overtaken Israel, and this was about 450 years before Christ. He had overtaken, and he was a king, and he was very successful. In his 3rd year of reign, he decided he was going to have a big blowout bash. And I'm not just talking about a weekend bash. I'm talking about one that lasted for 180 days. Can you imagine? A banquet that lasted 180 days. And all the important people in all of his provinces, which they controlled basically everything in the world that we know that they knew of at that time, 127 provinces. And so he had all of his dignitaries and all of his rulers come in, and they just kind of basically celebrated for 180 days. And everybody was welcome. And at the end of the 180 days, he decides to have another banquet. And at that banquet, he has his top officials who were present, and everybody who was welcome to join in. And they were drinking the wine, and they were celebrating, and they were showing off all of the things that they had accumulated. They were showing off all of the gold and all of their possessions and everything. And on the 7th day of this banquet, the king decides, because it says he was merry with wine, and I think we would call that snockered. You know, that was the term I had. I've been around a lot of people who were merry with wine, and they were snockered to me. But at any rate, he was feeling pretty good. And so with all of his dignitaries and everything there, he tells one of the eunuchs, he says, go call the queen so that she might come out, and we'll just see how beautiful she is. So I just want you to see how beautiful the queen is. And so as this is all going on, the eunuchs go to the queen, who is also having a banquet for the women. And the eunuch comes to the queen and says, the king requests your presence to come and show off your crown and your royalty and your beauty. And she says, tell the king, forget it, I ain't going. Now this was something that just did not happen in those days. And so the king gets all upset and he gets all angered, and all of a sudden it doesn't say he's merry anymore, it says he's angry. And so he talks to all of his officials and all of the people who were in charge of the law and who knew the law, and he says, what should we do? What can I do about this? And the response of them was that if we let her get away with this, then all of the women are going to start telling their husbands what they're going to do and what they're not. So she was removed from being the queen. No longer was she ever able to go before the presence of the king again. She was removed her throne, kicked her out, she was done. But then after some time, the king kind of gets, kind of like to have a queen. And so he starts talking to his officials again, and they said, what are we going to do? He says, they decided they would go through all the provinces, 127 provinces of the land, and they would take the most beautiful young women, and they would bring them in, and they would prepare them with cosmetics, with ointments, with all this stuff. And they would put them through a rigorous program of it was 1 year of training and preparation. And then one by one, these women would come before the king, and they would come in one night and leave the next morning. And if the king liked them, then he could call for them again. If he did not like them, or he wasn't no special favoritism to them, then he would send them into a harem where they just, I don't know what happened to them after that, but they never come before the king again. They had no more useful purpose. One of the women that was chosen was Esther. Esther was a young Jewish woman whose cousin, basically, was Mordecai. Mordecai lived in the capital of Susa, which is where the king was at. And during this time, he knew what was going on, and then they take his cousin, whom he was raising. He was raising Esther because her parents had both died. And so he was the caretaker of her. It would appear that he was much older than her, but he was raising her like his own daughter. So whenever they go and take her to the harem and they start preparing her, Mordecai would come along by the court's gate every day and check on her, see how she was doing. He could not go in because he was a Jew, but he could go on the outside of the courts and he could check on her. And as he would go and check on her every day, one day he came by and there was a couple of the royal officials who were plotting to assassinate the king. And Mordecai heard of it. And so he sends word to Esther, and he says, there's a couple of scoundrels out here that are meaning harm to the king, just so you know. Let the king know. She passes the message on in Mordecai's name, and the two guys that were looking for trouble were found out. It was discovered that the plot was real, and they were removed, hung, killed, whatever. End of story, as far as that goes for a while. When Esther comes in to the harem, those who were in charge of the women, they saw her and immediately they favor her. And they put her to the most prominent position. They give her her own maids. They give her the best of everything. And they prepare her for a year for her to go before the king. When she finally does go before the king, he finds favor with her and immediately falls in love with her and chooses her as the next queen. After those two scoundrels were arrested, there was a man by the name of Haman that the king promoted to second in command. He was a self-centered, very egotistical man, and he had a very much of an evil side to him. And every time he would come in the presence of the other officials, besides the king, they would all bow down and give him honor. And every time he would go outside by the city gate, all the people would bow down and give him honor, except for Mordecai. Mordecai would not bow down. And it made Haman so irate and so angry. And he says, I've got to do something with this guy. And he finds out that he's a Jew. And so he talks to the king and he says, tell you what, king, he says, there's a people that lives in your land that really are no benefit to you. They don't like you. They don't serve you. And I think that we ought to just get rid of all of them. And so by lot, we have chosen a day on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is Adar. And on that day, we are going to just completely annihilate this whole race of people that's not really doing you any favors. And the king, I don't know whether he had a lot of other stuff on his mind. He just didn't care. He just trusted him more than he should. Don't know what his deal was. But anyway, he says, here's my signet ring. Do whatever you want to. Do whatever you want to. And this was like in the first part of the year. So whenever all this takes place, after it was decreed that edict was sent out to all 127 provinces in every different language. Sounds like we're having a good time out there, doesn't it? Letter was sent out, and it was posted every place that what was going on, what was going to happen. All the Jewish people are just up in arms. They don't know what to do. Mordecai himself. Let me start reading verse 4. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and wailed loudly and bitterly. And he went as far as the king's gate, for no one was to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And in each and every province where the command and decree of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. And many lay on sackcloth and ashes. Then Esther's maidens and her eunuchs came and told her, and the queen writhed in great anguish, and she sent garments to clothe Mordecai, that he might remove his sackcloth from him, but he did not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, and I'm terrible on these names, from the king's eunuchs, whom the king had appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai and learn what this was and why it was. So Hathach came to Mordecai to the city square in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict which had been issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show Esther and inform her, and order her to go to the king to implore him his favor and to plead with him for her people. And Hathach came back to related Mordecai's words to Esther. Then Esther replied to whatever this guy's name is, and ordered him to reply to Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king to the inner court who is not summoned, he has but one law, that he put to death, unless the king holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. And have I not been summoned to come before the king for these 30 days? And they related Esther's words to Mordecai. I'm going to stop right there and catch you up, because I've mispronounced that poor guy's name 3 times, and I've read it 4. Probably mispronounced it all 4 times. But anyway, Mordecai is sitting outside the gate in sackcloth and ashes, wailing and weeping bitterly. Esther is in the king's palace. Nobody knows that Esther is a Jew except for Mordecai. And so she finds out that Mordecai is out there making a scene. And so she tells one of her eunuchs, she says, gather some clean clothes and take him to Mordecai and have him pull himself together. Basically what it said. And Mordecai refuses. And so says, well, then what's wrong? Mordecai sends word back, along with a copy of the edict that had been issued, to Esther, and he says, you need to go before the king and get this resolved. Because this is complete annihilation. This is not just beating up. This is not just torturing. This is complete and total annihilation. And so she sends back through this message and says, I haven't been before the king for 30 days. And if you know what the law is, which they did, anyone who requests and comes before the king without being invited or without being commissioned, if he doesn't want to see you, you're dead. That's the law. Unless he points the golden scepter to receive them, they do not live. So, I mean, wouldn't you be a little hesitant? I mean, honestly, Mordecai saying, go before the king, he hasn't called on me for 30 days. And if I go in there and he's not wanting to see me, he's got something else going on, I'm dead meat. I'm done. This is the end of the story for me. Let me keep going. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise from the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this?" Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go and assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day, and I and my maidens also will fast in the same way. And thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and did just as Esther had commanded him. I'm going to read the next 3 verses. Now it came about on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace in front of the king's rooms. And the king was sitting on his royal throne in the throne room opposite the entrance to the palace. And it happened when the king saw Esther, the queen, standing in the court, she obtained favor in his sight, and the king extended to Esther the golden scepter which was in his hands. So Esther came near and touched the top of the scepter. Then the king said to her, "What is troubling you, Queen Esther, and what is your request? Even to half the kingdom will be given to you." Very touchy situation. The whole Jewish population, not just in Susa, but in all 127 provinces, was going to be completely annihilated, and there was no way to stop it. Mordecai has summoned Esther, and he says, "Go talk to the queen," or to the king. And she said, "But I haven't seen him for 30 days. And if I go in unannounced, unwanted, not only will my request not be known, but I won't be known anymore either." The response that Mordecai had for Esther, and is one that I think that is very pertinent to us today, and this is the focus of it. He says, "Who knows but what you have not been called for this moment?" For this moment. And so she agrees to go on one condition. She tells Mordecai, she says, "Tell everybody that you know, all the Jews in Susa, to fast and pray for the next 3 days, morning and night. I and my maidens will do the same. And after we have fasted and prayed for 3 days, then I will go in before the king, and if I perish, I perish." Now, what is neat about this is how God honored that fasting and prayer. And whenever she comes before the king, he doesn't just say, "What do you want?" But you notice he says, "What is troubling you, Queen Esther? whatever it is, I will give you up to half of my kingdom. Whatever it is." Now you talk about finding favor. She found favor. Now, I challenge you to go ahead and read the rest of the story, because I know there's parts that I've left out. Queen Esther asks, she says, "King, would you and Haman come to a banquet I'm going to have later on today?" "Yeah, whatever you want, up to half of my kingdom you can have." So they have a little banquet, a little get together. Haman comes, second in command. The king comes. And the only request she makes that day, she says, "Would you come to a banquet that I'm going to prepare for you tomorrow? And I'll make my request known to you then." "Yeah, we can do that. Haman walks out of there, not even touching the ground. Of all the people she could have picked, she chose me. I am something. I am, there's just a fine line between where I'm at and where the king's at. The queen even wants my presence. And he is so up on top of things, and he walks out by the city gate, and all the people are bowing down except for Mordecai, and he won't bow down, and his anger just boils within him. And so he got to get rid of this guy. He cannot wait another 12 months, 10 months, whatever it is, to get rid of this guy. He wants to get rid of him now. So he calls all of his friends and his wife together, and he says, this guy's just driving me nuts. I got to do something with him. I got to get rid of him some way or another. And so it was decided that they talked about it, and they says, well, since you're so highly favored with the king, why don't you go to the king in the morning and ask that you get the chance to hang him because he won't bow down to you? Have a gallows built 50 cubits high, which would have been about like 75 foot tall. Have a gallows built so tall that everybody in town will see it. And then you can go in and you'll find favor with the king, because after all, the king loves you and the queen loves you, because after all, you're honored enough to go to his presence for the banquet tomorrow, honored enough that you went today. And surely the king will grant you this request. He says, that's what I'm going to do. So he has the gallows built that day. That next morning, he shows up at the king's palace very early. The king had trouble sleeping that night, and he just couldn't get rested. He just couldn't find his peace or anything. And so he says, well, have the Chronicles brought out and read to me. And they read to the part to where Mordecai had informed them about the two scoundrels that was trying to kill him, and how that plot was discovered, and how the situation was avoided. And the king says, what was ever done for Mordecai on this? And they said, nothing. He says, we're going to change that. So he says, is there anybody in the outer court? And they says, well, they looked and they said, yeah, Haman's out there. He says, bring him in. So Haman comes in. He's wanting so bad to just ask for Mordecai's head to be hung. And the king poses the question very neatly. He says, what do you think should be done for someone that the king wants to honor? That he wants to honor and elevate above everybody else. He said, what do you think should be done? And Haman says, oh, wow, you got to be talking about me. So he says, oh, I know. He says, put him on one of the royal steeds and get a robe that the king has worn and lead him through the town, by one of your highest ranking officials, and just say, this is what happens to the man that the king wants to honor. And the king says, that's a good idea. He says, go do that for Mordecai. Now, can you imagine the guy that you hate more than anybody else in your life, and now then you're having to put a royal robe on him, adorn him, put him on a royal steed, and lead him through the streets of the city, saying, I can't think his heart was in it whenever he said, this is how the king likes to honor people. And he led him all the way through. Well, he knew better than to ask for his head at this point. After he comes home, he's crying to his wife, he's crying to his friends, this is what I had to do. This is how my day went. You ever had a day like that or anywhere close? And he says, this is how my day went. And they says, well, look at the time. You better get to the queen's banquet. Well, at least she still likes me. So he goes to the queen's banquet. And at the banquet, they start drinking the wine, and the queen is sitting on her couch and everything. And the king says, what is it, Esther? Up to half of my kingdom I'll give to you. What is it that you want? And she says, well, there's an enemy in our midst, and he wants to destroy and completely annihilate my people. And she makes herself known that she is a Jew. And that this man is, by deception, is wanting to completely wipe out an entire population on a certain day. And the king goes, who is it? And they said, that guy right there, Haman. And the king is so furious that he goes out onto the porch and he is just seething with anger. And he is just trying to deal with this. You know, how could something like this, how did I let something like this happen in my own kingdom? And after he kind of calms down a little bit, he goes back into where Esther and Haman was. And Haman was laying on the couch, basically just bowed down on the couch on top of, or, you know, by Esther, and just pleading for his life. And Haman says, now then you're going to assault my queen here while I'm still right here with you? He had his head covered, and he put to use that gallows that Haman had just built. Shorten this up just a little bit. Mordecai is exalted, put in his place. Mordecai asked for permission to have all of the Jews be able to defend themselves. Because it was a royal law, they could not cancel it. But what they did was they made another law that said all the Jews have the right to assemble and to defend themselves. That anybody who comes against them, they can have the right to defend themselves and kill any of their enemies and take all the plunder for themselves. On the 13th day of Adar, which I looked it up according to our calendar, it's about a month before Easter, the Jewish calendar versus ours. Nobody wanted to attack any Jews. And those few who did, that were their enemies, the Jews wiped out. But they didn't take their spoil. It was so impressive that there was still some work to be done. So on the 14th day of Adar, they were granted the permission to defend themselves once again. That celebration, the celebration of their victory, was celebrated throughout all of Susa and throughout all the 127 provinces. It is still celebrated today. We know it as Purim. If you ever look on the calendar, a Jewish calendar, and it says Purim, that's what they're still celebrating. The day that God delivered his people from complete annihilation. Now then, all of this took place because a young girl who was a Jew followed the advice and instructions of her cousin and guardian, Mordecai. Whenever for 5 years, she was the queen and really played no part. I mean, she was living the luxurious life, but yet really played no part in any of the kingdom. It was not until after that her service was needed, and it was her that went before the king and asked for permission to defend themselves. But during those years of her service, she was faithful to her God. She was carrying out and acting out the behavior of a godly person. How do I know that? Because whenever she asked for her servants to pray and fast with her for 3 days, she didn't have to ask them twice. They all respected her, adored her, enjoyed her, loved her, and so they prayed with her for those 3 days, fasted and prayed. There's a lot of times in our Christian walk, whenever we have that life-changing experience, we get that place in our life where we think, what's God want me to do? What is my special purpose in the kingdom of God? There's got to be something that God wants me to do. And the first thing that God wants us to do, and Jesus tells us, follow me. Just follow me. Just follow me and love people like I love people. Man, if we can do that, think how our world would change if even just the Christians followed that rule. To follow the ways of Christ and loved people like he loved us. And then be patient. Because in the patience, God will bring you up. He will give you the knowledge. He'll give you the power. He'll give you the guidance. He'll give you that relationship so that whenever he needs something special, you're right there ready to go. I was listening to a story on the news the other day, and it was about a tent revival back many years ago. I believe it was in California. And two young boys come to this tent revival, and it was full. And so there was no place to sit. And so they came and they looked, and they saw it was so crowded. And so they got ready to leave. And an usher saw them leaving, chased them down, and says, "You come." And he says, "We'll find a place for you to sit. We'll find a place for you. So just come on back. Don't leave now. Just come on back." The usher, we don't know what his name was. One of the boys that was there, by the name of Billy Graham. He accepted the Lord that day at that meeting. And the guy that was with him was his right-hand man through his entire ministry. All because an usher was just doing his part. I often wonder if that usher ever got to know what he had done by calling those two boys and says, "Come on, I'll find a place for you. I'll find a place for you." Esther was put in a place to where she was able to influence the greatest king in the history at that time. And because of that, she was able to save an entire population of the Jewish faith. Now, we may not ever be in a place to where we're going to change the world like she did. But if we will follow Christ and just walk in his path and try to love like he loved, we may change the world of somebody else. Somebody might come to know Christ just because they see Christ in you. And for that, it may never make the newspapers, may never make the headlines, but it may change their entire world and change their entire destiny. The key is to be patient and follow. Just follow. A thought came to me just as I've been going through this in my head, and that is that the devil loves for young Christians to get in leadership positions. The devil loves that. And you know why? Because whenever you're young in your Christian walk, you make mistakes. This is voice of experience. You make mistakes. And the devil loves to see a Christian stumble, especially someone who's been put in authority. So the goal of us as Christians should be, and this is speaking to myself just as much as anybody else, follow Christ, try and love like he loved, and be open for whatever opportunity God presents you with. This morning I'm going to present you with an opportunity, and that is if you have never accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, he's here waiting for you. He wants to have that relationship with you. I believe he's got a special purpose for you. May not be a world-changing thing, but it might be for somebody. If God is speaking to your heart today about something that you know you need to do, take your stand for Christ. Maybe it's in this church, whatever it is. He's calling you for a purpose. Follow him, love like he loved, and sit back and wait. And I promise you, the opportunity will come. As we all stand to sing the hymn of invitation this morning, don't put off what you know you ought to do today. Tomorrow's not guaranteed. But eternity is for those who follow. Won't you stand as we sing?